in a big relegation six-pointer at the Cardiff City Stadium. Cardiff beat Hull 1-0 thanks to a second-half goal from Callum Robinson. Not a result I was expecting. We were harping on about Hull's away record being quite good in Sunday's episode, weren't we, Justin? Mm-hmm. They had won 4 of their last 5 away from home, while Cardiff did have the poorest home record, the second poorest home record in the Championship. But here you go, a big win for Cardiff.
Yeah, obviously considering the general form and play of Cardiff, and like I said, Hull being pretty nifty away, it's hard to disagree with you on that. But then again, Cardiff do have this habit of pulling a result out of their arse, though. You know, they'll just be on a bit of a poor run of form, and then all of a sudden they win a game, and then they'll win the second game, and they're back to being a inconsistent side. But yeah, that being said, from a Cardiff point of view, was this a big performance? I don't think so. I think it was a gritty game, a tight game between two teams who, I wouldn't say was scared.
I was going to say gritty's one way of describing it. It certainly wasn't one for the ages, was it?
No. A game of very few chances, very few big moments. And you know, it was separated by a good strike from Callum Robinson, but a deflected strike from Callum Robinson.
Yeah, there are only 12 shots in total between them in this game. And that's probably indicative of how these two are two of the poorer sides in the division. But look, I was looking at Cardiff thinking their form had just started to turn, and whether it was turning at a really, really bad time. And this result kind of goes in the face of that. Having said that, they weren't great, were they? They were just not as bad as Hull, who were particularly really poor here. The contrast between them in this game and them becoming the first team to win away at Sunderland at the weekend is very stark. But Cardiff got the 3 points, and what a big 3 points it could turn out to be for them. Callum Robinson got the goal, Justin, as you mentioned, albeit via a deflection. It's now 12 goals for the season for him, including 7 in his last 10. Only Boya Sainz and Joel Pirro have scored more than him this season now. In all but one of Cardiff's wins this season, Callum Robinson has been on the score sheet, so he's a bit of a lucky charm for the old Bluebirds, Justin, but he's having quite the season, isn't he?
He is, but I think if it's always been the case with Callum Robinson. Now, if you keep him fit, then he's a player you want in your team, isn't he? He was centre to some of the really promising attacks throughout this game that Cardiff had. I say really promising attacks. There's a lot of half chances in this, but Callum Robinson was at the centre of creating those half chances. His link-up play with others, especially in this game, was incredibly promising. 2 of the half chances I've mentioned came from good link-up play with Chris Willock, and they were both left-foot shots from Robinson, I think, in the first half. But they were chances nonetheless. And like I said, you've got to have a player like that in your team who can make a difference. And Callum Robinson scoring a lot of goals is that player, and having a player like him can be the difference in staying up for Cardiff. So keep him fit. I think he's a player that will probably get into a lot of teams. You got to think as well, not too long ago, he was signed by Sheffield United and signed by West Brom. So there were teams at the higher ends of the Championship / Premier League, not higher ends Premier League, but bouncing in between Championship and Premier League, who were interested in him. So, yeah, he's a good player, always has been. It's just a case of making sure he doesn't get injured.
Well, I did pick my underrated 11 on the second tier YouTube channel last week, and picking an underrated striker is a pretty impossible task because they're the ones who are always grabbing the headlines, aren't they? But I chose Callum Robinson because I think he's been a bit underrated throughout his career, really. Yes, in terms of goals, this looks as if it's going to be his first where he's got more than 12 in a league season, but he offers so much to a team other than just goals, running past defenders, setting up teammates. He is and always has been a really good striker at Championship level, and this season he's spearheading Cardiff's survival, and they would be in a very sticky situation without him. And this win does a great deal for Cardiff's hopes of staying up. They've climbed up to 19th, 6 points clear of the bottom 3, so could be a big result in the grand scheme of the relegation battle. With Hull, though, wins against the likes of Sunderland don't mean as much if you're going to lose to the likes of Cardiff 3 days later, do they? And this is a bizarre stat for you, Justin. Since Ruben Sellers took over, Hull have actually won more points against sides in the top 6 than outside of the top 6. They've beaten Sheffield United, Sunderland and Blackburn, drawn with Leeds, but have also lost to the likes of Stoke, Preston, QPR, and now Cardiff. And not to discredit those results, but I know which games I'd prefer to be winning. Surely it's the ones against the teams around you, isn't it?
Well, I guess wins are wins, but you are right. I think taking 3 points directly off your opponents that are down at the bottom of the table with you is going to be highly valuable come the end of the season. So you're probably right in that sense. But I think Ruben Sellers points to this pretty much after the game when he said we were playing two different ways. At times we look like we can compete with anyone, then at others we look like we are suffering. And I think a good indictment of that is the possession stat in this game. Is that Hull had 67% of the ball, Cardiff had 33%. Yes, there wasn't many chances, but you'd argue that Cardiff looked the more threatening, like I said, with those Callum Robinson half chances. And again, you'd argue that the losses to the likes of Stoke, Preston, QPR, and obviously Cardiff, looking at those numbers, passing numbers, possession numbers, are Hull having less of the ball. I think when you are inconsistent like Hull are, they've got a young team, and it feels like a new team as well. They're probably a lot better when they take the game to the opposition, i.e., sitting on that counter-attack, counter-pressing in their own half, etc. So when things slow down, like it did in this game, that's where it comes undone for Hull. So that's where you need your players with personality and quality on the ball to come into it. That's where you need your confidence to come in. And unfortunately, Hull, it's those games that are letting them down.
Yeah, well, they've been so inconsistent all season, haven't they? And it's the main reason why they're still very much fighting for their lives. And I think another reason why I would want to be beating the teams around me, other than just being able to take points off them, is because I think it shows that consistency-wise, you are better than those sides. Whereas if you're having one-off games where you're beating the top sides, then they can just be sort of anomalies, I guess.
Yes,
it is strange how often they are getting results against the top six sides, though. But I do think Hull are better under Ruben Sellers. Maybe subconsciously, I'm basing that on the games which I've watched live, like that win against Sheffield United. But I still think Hull will stay up because I think there's at least three worse teams than them. But the fact they've not managed to get back-to-back wins since the start of October says a lot about the inconsistency in this side. Just in 5 in 10, name 5 teams with City at the end of their name.
Man City, Stoke City, Cardiff City, Hull City. Salford City. No.
You were doing so well, and then suddenly you just froze. You couldn't think of another city.
I've got my notes in front of me, so obviously I've got Cardiff, Hull and Stoke right next to me, and obviously Man City is the first one that came to my head, and fucking Salford. Ugh.
Salford, not Salford.
Whatever.
Justin, I think you were successful in that 5 in 10, and we'll swiftly move on to the other game, which happened in midweek, and it was Middlesbrough who ended a run of 5 successive losses by winning 3-1 away at Stoke, and this was more like it from Borough, wasn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so the result was a huge positive, but the manner of the performance, I think, is where Michael Carrick will come away really, really smiling. They just look like they expressed themselves. They look way more confident than they should have been, on the back of quite a few defeats. But again, Stoke, when Stoke equalised, the Borough players bounced back. So they show a lot of character, they show a lot of personality, they show their talent and their quality. And I think that shows that there is sign of life in this Carrick team. They kept plugging away, and they let the quality speak, which I don't think we've seen often, probably since the turn of the year. So it's a huge positive. It's a huge win. But the challenge is repeating this type of performance against a team who aren't, as to be blunt, shit as Stoke.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a dynamic, back to their best kind of performance, but they probably were the better side and took their chances when they came. Well, nearly all their chances, Justin, because the result could have been a lot more comfortable if it wasn't for a shocking miss by Tommy Conway. Miss of the season for you, Justin?
It's not miss of the season because my mind goes back to the Ebo Adams one for Derby.
Oh, God, yeah, of course.
It was against Cardiff, I think, earlier on in the season, where all he has to do is roll the ball into the back of the net. Obviously, that's a counter-attack. I think this one's a little bit of a harder chance to miss. I'm not making excuses for Tommy Conway, but just to analyse it a little bit deeper, because that's what we do on this show. The ball is coming in at pace. It's not flat on the floor either. I think there's a higher degree of difficulty with this one than others that we've seen, especially that Ebo Adams one. So it was a shocking miss, a bad miss, but not the worst one of the season, because that Ebo Adams one was horrific.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to get topped, really, is it? But yeah, it was an absolute howler. It's got to be said. It's one of those where it's literally harder to miss, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
He has had an absolute.
It's the fact that he got it over the bar from a yard out.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I did appreciate him instantly running off and giving a thumbs up to whoever it was that crossed it, because usually when someone does a howling miss, the camera focuses on them with their hands on their head, and he tries to style it out by acting like he's just missed a half chance. No big
Great
deal.
Great ball, mate. Next time.
Yeah, exactly. But it is bad. Now that you've mentioned the Ibu Adams one, it's not miss of the season, but it's definitely a contender. I was looking actually at the XG. It got a 0.78 in terms of XG, which is bad, but I thought it would have still been higher. I was looking
out. Yeah.
I thought, what is the highest this season? And I don't know what the Ibu Adams XG was, Justin, but Patrick Bamford got a 0.98 earlier in the season. Do you remember that miss he did against Preston just before Christmas? Because that was bad. But to be honest, I think Conway's was easier to score than that one.
Yeah, you are right. But like you said, Tommy Conway, the ball's gone past the goalkeeper. All it needed to do was hit his shin and it would go in. But the fact that obviously you got a little bit of uplift on it because the ball's bouncing a little bit, it was harder to miss. It was an easy one to score, and I'm surprised that's a 0.78. But that being said, that chance there is almost the entirety of what Stoke created in that game as well. So that's a bad miss, but also a bad indictment of what Stoke were offering in return to Borough.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. But yeah, it was a horror moment for him, and he did put on Twitter afterwards, Tommy Conway, that he got there eventually with the goal. So it's all good fun, really, Justin. But yeah, it's a result that doesn't help Stoke at all in their fight to stay up, does it? They've dropped down a place to 20th after Cardiff's win, just 5 points above the bottom three. Did you know, Justin, Stoke have now actually won fewer points in their first 9 games under Mark Robins than they did in their first 9 games under Narcis Palach, which is essentially a perfect indicator that the Robins appointment hasn't had the desired effect so far, has it?
We're stating the obvious, aren't we, with that? Look, I like Robins. I like Mark Robins. I love him. But you're asking a lot of the guy here, aren't we, to turn this Stoke team around? This Stoke team has got problems that cannot be remedied with the change of manager. They've tried twice already. There are countless changes to the club at strategic level that I've gone through in detail in the past. There's a new head of recruitment or a new recruitment strategy. They're going for a more data-led approach, which I don't particularly agree with. But there's no accountability from the top, from the leadership at the club and the ownership. So I feel for Mark Robins, I feel for Narcis Palach, and I feel for Steven Schumacher. I think they're all victims of one of the worst run clubs in the division.
And Alex Neil, Nathan Jones,
Michael O'Neill,
Gary Rowett. Is there someone else we've forgotten in there?
Paul Lambert. But yeah, they're all victims to one of the worst run clubs in the division for my money, which is shocking because they've got a lot of wealth. But with that, with that wealth, you might actually argue that they are the worst run club in the division in comparison or in conjunction with the wealth that they have. And I think an empty stadium is testament to that. The fans are speaking by not turning up anymore. A lot of people have fallen out of love with the club, and that's where they're at. And as I say, Mark Robins is not going to be the man that turns that around. It's got to be led from the top. And unfortunately, there's no leadership. There's no ownership of scenarios. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And the results are testament to that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you say there, Justin, but I think Mark Robins has got to take some of the blame for it, because if you look at the underlying data, Stoke have been conceding a ridiculous amount of shots all season. Them and Plymouth have faced by far the most in the division. And Mark Robins has made next to no improvement in that department. And going forwards, they've actually been having fewer shots than they were under Narcis Palach. And in terms of XG, they've only clearly won one of the 9 games Robins has been in charge of, and that was Plymouth at home, which is, a bit of a gimme. So you could argue not only has Robins not improved them, he's actually made them worse. And that does just about sum up the mess that is Stoke City. They are experts at taking a manager's career and bringing it down a few pegs, aren't they, as we were saying? But we have got to remember they are on their 3rd manager of the season. John Walters, the sporting director, took a gamble on getting rid of Steven Schumacher, who was doing an okay job, not amazing, but okay. And the gamble didn't pay off. Now they're paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
And would it be much of a surprise if Stoke were to go down this season? I don't think so, Justin.
No, it wouldn't be a surprise to me. We've spoken at length at times about Cardiff circling the drain of dropping down to the Championship. And I think Stoke, they're on the way, aren't they? And this could be the season that they do drop off. I think Stoke aren't going to play their way out of trouble. They're hoping that Derby, Luton and Plymouth stop picking up points. That's what's going to get Stoke out of a relegation battle or a drop into the bottom three here. I've got no positive things to say about this football club anymore. And unfortunately, that's not any agenda before anyone pipes up about that. The owners, John Walters, they've taken the positivity out of it, unfortunately. So trying to find positives to really drop into is difficult. It really is difficult now. And unfortunately, the potential reward for all of this is a trip down to League One. And that's a real threat. That's a real threat now.
They're a club who have been... They haven't been circling the drain as much as Cardiff, but they're not far behind, are they, in that regard? Yeah. So that's why it wouldn't be a massive surprise. And their owners are some of the richest in the Championship, possibly even the richest. But because the money has been spent so badly over the years, it means that they can't spend that money. And I don't think they really want to spend any more than they have done already. So that's pretty much Stoke City in a nutshell. Just a reminder, by the way, that we did have a £50 bet at the start of the season that Stoke would finish above 14th. I said they wouldn't. You said they would.
I've been screwed over by John Walters. I'm sorry. Stephen Schumacher's still in charge of that club. They are mid-table playoff challengers.
I think you've been screwed over by yourself because it's a painful reminder for you every season. You head into it thinking this will be the season Stoke get better. It won't. It's never going to happen. They're never going to get better.
If this doesn't come in, I'm sending an invoice to Jonathan Walters for this. I'm sorry. There's only one man to point the finger at for this. They were well on course for a mid-table finish in that first 7 games under Stephen Schumacher.
7 games.
And he ruined it.
Oh, dear me. Some people just never learn, ladies and gents. Justin, let's have a quick break. After that, we'll talk about the new head coach of Blackburn Rovers and the ever-increasing gap between the Premier League and the Championship. Welcome back to the Second Tier Podcast. So we've got a few news bits which have taken place over the past few days. Justin, we've got plenty for us to get our teeth into. Blackburn, they've appointed Valérien Ismaël as their new head coach. The former Barnsley, West Brom and Watford boss has signed a deal until 2028. He replaces John Eustace, of course, after his departure to Derby. In a statement, Blackburn chief exec Steve Waggett said, "We were hugely impressed with Valérien throughout what was a rigorous recruitment process. He knows the Championship extremely well and what it takes to finish in the playoffs." Valérien Ismaël to Blackburn. I know someone who's going to be a big fan of this appointment, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, boy. Listeners are in for a rough few months. This is a vow propaganda podcast now. This isn't Championship. This is Valérien Ismaël. The Valérien Ismaël podcast. I love this appointment. I really, really do. I really, really do. There's a lot of variables that really flow into it. And I think a lot of my love for Valérien Ismaël is just his no-nonsense approach, firstly to coaching, but also, he's actually more flexible than I think a lot of people give him credit for in terms of the styles. It does need refining, but I think for Blackburn's budget and squad, I think it's a good appointment. It makes sense. But before I start oozing, I'll let you chime in first, Ryan.
Cheers, mate. Yeah, I can tell you like the appointment. I really like it as well. I think West Brom and Watford fans might not like it as much as us, but I think Ismaël is definitely worthy of another chance at Championship level because the West Brom job was a bit of a thankless task under their ownership at the time. They didn't spend any money in the summer after they got relegated from the Premier League. And then at Watford, I think he did all right. He didn't get a massive amount of backing there either. And Watford being Watford will sack you as soon as there's the slightest stench of a bad run, which is what happened. So he's had a bit of a rough deal with his last 2 jobs, but we saw at Barnsley what he can do with a side who work hard and aren't afraid to be direct. I think a job like this, where there's not necessarily the pressure on him to guarantee success, will suit him as well. My only concern will be whether that Barnsley season was just a one-off. But I reckon this is a much better acid test with him than West Brom and Watford was, because I think this is a good fit.
I do think it's a good fit. And I think the one thing you really do need to point out is the Blackburn, with the budget, as we well know, roughly around 12 grand a week they're offering maximum. Maybe with a bigger budget, they could have attracted someone who isn't in a position where they've got something to prove, like Valérien Ismaël does, because obviously his last 2 jobs at Championship level haven't been a success. But like I pointed out, I think he's shown a lot more flexibility than many may think. Obviously, you've got that Barnsley spell where it was a huge success, where they were so direct, so aggressive, so high press, to a more, I wouldn't say conservative approach at West Brom, but it was more possession based. And then at Watford, it started off being quite direct, and then it resorted to possession based, which is where it went wrong at Watford. And I don't think that will strictly be the case here with Blackburn, because I think under John Eustace, they showed that they can be flexible. And I think that will suit Ismaël down, more so than his previous spell at Watford. So, and I think as well as that, the intangibles you've got to think about is he's going to create a bigger sense of belief amongst the fans, and he's going to create a team that works incredibly hard. And he's brought in Dean Whitehead as a coach as well. I think is a really smart move. I think the squad that they've got at Blackburn, I think, is suited to what he wants to bring as well, because they can mix it up. They've got aggressive players like Tronstad and Lewis Travis. They've got the physicality in that final third and the engine in Andy Weimann, Mac Targay. They've got good quality in the final third in Todd Cantwell and Tyree Stolen. I think it's a very good fit, and I'm excited to see what he can do. It might not work out, but I think this is a really, really sensible and exciting appointment in terms of how he can get this team playing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether he does keep Blackburn in the top 6, because he's basically got to hit the ground running, hasn't he? With 12 games to remaining. It's a very strange position for him to be in, because I can't think of many cases over the years where a manager has come in at a top 6 club and been tasked with 12 games to go to keep them in the top 6. It's very peculiar, isn't it? So how he takes to that, it'll be interesting to see, but I don't think it'll be the end of the world if he doesn't. And heading into next season, when he's got time to have a pre-season and get the players in that he wants, could be a repeat occasion for Blackburn. So yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how it goes. Let's go to Leeds, where their captain, Ethan Ampadu, is set to undergo surgery on a knee injury. He missed Monday's big game against Sheffield United because of it, and the club haven't confirmed yet how long he'll be out for, but Daniel Farke has called it a serious injury. Now, Ampadu missed 10 weeks earlier in the season, also because of a knee injury. However, Farke says it's the other knee, which he's hurt this time around. Either way, still a blow for Leeds, isn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it's a huge blow. We all know what Ethan Ampadu can do and how important he can be to that team, to that starting 11. I think his ability on the ball gives Joe Rodon and Pascal Struijk, or whoever centre off could sometimes be Ethan Ampadu, gives them a good avenue to play through. And Ethan Ampadu is good at getting the ball into that final third. So yeah, it's frustrating, it's disappointing. I think most importantly, he's a big leader in that team. And we saw that in the Sheffield United game after the game, once the final whistle went, when all the players were in a huddle and Ethan Ampadu was delivering what looked like a very rousing speech to the team. So, his leadership qualities are there as well. So yeah, it's a huge disappointment. It's a huge blow. But I think the difference now is Ayo Tanaka's playing out of his skin. Joe Rothwell's impact in the last few games is huge, and his impact generally this season has been positive. Gruev, yes, there are still, I wouldn't say some question marks, but I think as in terms of a good passer through the thirds, he's more than capable of stepping up. So they're in a much healthier position now than what they were when he first got injured. That's probably the main positive you can take out of someone picking up a serious knee injury, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, really, Justin. It's fortunate in a way that it's coincided with Pascal Struijk coming back into the team and exactly. Gruev being back fit. So it's a blow, but it's not as big a blow as it could have been. Of course, Leeds would still very much like to have him in the team because they're a better team and they've got Ethan Ampadu in the side. And that's before you even get onto his leadership qualities as well, which you touched on there. So yeah, it is a blow, but I am not as concerned this time around as I was when it happened back in the autumn, because around that time, Justin, I was fearing the worst.
Yeah, and I think that was absolutely fair because, Ayo Tanaka's just come in. Has he really settled into that Leeds team yet? Arguing to say no. It's similar with Joe Rothwell. So, yeah, they were a lot of question marks back then. But like you said, they've got players in form now. We were talking just the other day about Tanaka being one of the players of the season, coming into the end of the season if his form does carry on. So, yeah, they're in a healthy position, and I think, yeah, it's like I said, it's a huge blow, but they've got quality now, and they are in a different stratosphere in terms of confidence and muscle memory when it comes to winning and seeing games out and managing games as well. So there's enough leaders on that pitch in Joe Roden, Pascal Strike, amongst others, and there's enough quality with the others that we've mentioned as well.
Yeah, for most teams, losing a player as good as Ethan Ampadu for an undisclosed period of time would be fairly disastrous at this stage in the season, wouldn't it? For Leeds, it's not that big a deal because, I mean, it's unfortunate, as I say, but it's not as big a deal because of the players that we've all mentioned there. We were just talking about Sheffield United, Justin. We're now under 3 weeks away from the Steel City derby. It'll be the first one to take place at Hillsborough in 6 years, which is very exciting, isn't it? But not for the first time, Sheffield Wednesday fans are unhappy with ticket pricing because the cheapest price for an adult ticket at this game is £47. However, they go up to as much as £54, which is, it's a bit steep, isn't it? The Steel City derby, obviously a massive game, one of the biggest games in the Championship season, but even then, £47 for a Championship game. Feels like they're taking the piss a bit there, doesn't it?
This is a theme since Chansiri took over. Ticket pricing at Hillsborough is quite horrendous. I mean, just going there as a derby fan, I've not been to an away game at Hillsborough since Chansiri bought the club because I don't want to pay excessive amounts of money for it. Derby Sheffield Wednesday has always been a high category game, rightly or wrongly. I mean, generally, I'm not a huge fan of category based pricing. That being said, my understanding of economics in football, what other ticketing pricing system could you possibly use for this one? So I think the other side of it is you've got to argue, despite us being a Championship podcast and Championship being a brilliant league, is a Championship game worth £47? As a singular, despite it being a derby game?
Yeah, I know what you mean because we're trying to strike a fine balance here without diminishing the Championship, but also
is football generally worth £47?
Well, I mean, you compare it to gigs, for example. Gigs go on for several hours, and it's your one-off chance to see that artist. Whereas in football,
exactly,
it's paying every single week pretty much. So that's when it really starts to burn a hole in your pocket. But look, the thing is, Sheffield Wednesday know that this game is going to sell out, and if not a sellout, a near sellout. So they're going to sell the tickets anyway. So they could put an X amount on tickets and they will still, sell really, really well. But you're meant to be, it feels like they're just exploiting the fans, doesn't it? Or at the end of the day, when it comes to something like this. And the thing that always has to be brought up about this is the amount of money football clubs in the Championship get from ticket revenue is minuscule compared to how much it costs to the fans themselves. Because £47, if you're going with someone else, then you're looking at £100 essentially to watch one game of football, and that is an extortionate amount.
I think the sad thing is, you could lose out on a generation of fans coming to watch games like this because, I wasn't birthed into a season ticket at Derby. My dad bought me a single ticket to go and watch them, and sadly, with unfortunately the cost of living crisis and just living is very expensive now. Can people genuinely afford to pay £47 to go and watch? £47 for a single ticket, and then you've got to take your kid there as well. Prices are expensive. They're going to want a sausage roll as well in the concourse.
Yeah,
things just keep creeping up. Yeah, travel as well.
All these things add up, and then it quickly becomes more than £100 if you're getting just two adult tickets.
Exactly, and that's the sad thing about this is I think you will start to lose a generation of supporters within that, and I think the long term gain of making sure kids are coming to watch Sheffield Wednesday is they're going to be season ticket holders in 3 or 4 years' time or whatever, because they fall in love with the atmosphere, etc. Like we all did, like you did, like I did, like every other listener who painfully watches their championship team. They've all gone through the same process. And unfortunately, I think when you price fans out of football like this, you lose that. And they go on, they'll want a Man City shirt next. And unfortunately, you've lost them. You've completely lost them.
Look at us moaning about modern football, Justin. Let's really have a proper moan about modern football, because I think it's worth us having a conversation about the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, because as we sit here right now, it's looking pretty likely that it will be the 3 newly promoted sides who are coming straight back down: Ipswich, Leicester and Southampton. And this will be the 2nd season running that's happened, Justin. And the reason I bring this up is because I've listened to a few football podcasts mention it over the past few days, but they don't seem as concerned as I am about the state of English football, because this is a huge problem that is only getting worse and worse, Justin. And us being, flag bearers for the Championship, it's incredibly worrying, isn't it?
I think it is. It's something that I've tried to fight a little bit and resist, just because you do want to be a flag bearer for the Championship. But you've got to really highlight the financial gap. And I think the important thing to really drill into to listeners and anyone who's trying to form an opinion on this is it's not necessarily the money you spend on transfer fees. I think clubs that have been in the Premier League for a long time have got a wage structure that exists that it can be double or triple the amounts of teams coming into the Premier League from the Championship. You just can't compete unless you're very, very smart and very strategic, like Brighton, like Brentford. They're very special cases, but unless you're doing it in a similar way to them, you've got to really, really throw money at it. You look at Nottingham Forest, for example; they've thrown money at it. Them being 3rd in the Premier League, it's not a fluke. But them being a Premier League team that are now sort of comfortable in the top flight, They've spent a lot of money to do it. They've not done it by doing what Brentford and Brighton have done.
They broke the financial rules to do it, Justin.
Exactly. Literally have broken financial rules to do it. So that's the risk you've got to take now to be in the Premier League, which is not what modern football should be about, nor is it competitive. And that's the big thing. Your product is Premier League football, and you're removing the competitiveness out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I did a whole YouTube video about this on the 2nd tier YouTube channel, so I'm probably going to repeat exactly what I said there, but I'll try to condense it into as short a rant as possible, because for me, the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is the biggest problem facing English football right now, because we're at a stage now where we've virtually got a monopoly on the Premier League places. You remember how we used to have a big 4 in the Premier League, then we had a big 6. We've essentially got a big 17 now, where we have the same 17 teams in the Premier League every season, because if the current bottom 3 do get relegated this season, each of the sides who stay up will have had at least 4 seasons worth of Premier League money from next season. And that's 4 seasons of assembling a squad, not just an 11, but more or less 2 or 3 11s, which are simply much stronger than anything a newly promoted side can produce. And the only way any of that big 17 get relegated is one of them having an absolutely disastrous season and one of the newly promoted sides being very, very good. It's not one or the other now. It's you essentially need both to happen. And even if they did get relegated, they'll instantly bounce back anyway, because they'll have several players on the books who are still too strong for the Championship. And we're also getting to a point where you've got the same 6 teams who are just getting promoted and relegated every season because they've got enough Premier League money to make them too strong for the Championship. And the only way that cycle gets disrupted is if one of those teams has a disastrous season, see Luton Town, or there's an incredibly smart run club who are able to challenge them despite not having bucket loads of money, see Ipswich Town and to a lesser extent Sunderland. So we're at a stage now where we're just about seeing the same clubs in every division each season. And let's be honest, the teams who do go up this season, can we really see them staying up? Leeds, maybe, because of their resources, but without wanting to piss on the chips before they've even started the meal, Burnley, Sheffield United, Sunderland, anyone else, I would give next to no chance of actually staying up. That's just the brutal harsh truth of the state of play in English football, and nothing seems to be getting done about it. We may as well have had the European Super League with no promotion or relegation, because that's essentially what we've got now, Justin. Dear me. Sorry, I've ranted for a while now, as predicted. So anything you want to take up with me on that, Justin?
There's nothing I want to take up. Just have a sip of water, have a moment, and we'll get back to it. You are right, though. It's just a sad state of affairs, and unfortunately, until I think the EFL are doing everything they can. They're trying to negotiate a higher bracket of financial income, and that's absolutely fair. But I think there's a lot pointing in the direction of Premier League. You look at I think it's the EPPP, where Premier League's or Category 1 academies, they essentially get first dibs on youngsters at other clubs. There's a lot. There's a lot of factors that basically, if you're in the Premier League, you're in a very good position because
it's so imbalanced. Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and that's frustrating. I don't know whether the solution is unifying the Premier League and the EFL, because having two separate bodies is just a bit of a strange scenario anyway. And obviously that's from the Premier League breakaway back in the early 90s, but football's changed a lot since then. So do we need more reform to get to this point? For example, I don't think a football watchdog is ever going to change this from the government. I can't remember what the exact terminology is. Yeah, regulator.
Do you not think? Because the way I look at it is, I think the only answer to this, and it's a very lazy excuse, is money. I think it is as simple as that.
Yeah,
and as we sit here right now, if you ask the Premier League, they'll say that there isn't an imbalance, or there isn't a huge chasm between the Premier League and the Championship, which is obviously bollocks at this stage. Whereas, and the thing is, the Premier League aren't going to change that, because they're run by the clubs, aren't they? They're the ones who are just going to keep saying everything's fine, because they want to just keep getting their money in. So the only way it can change is by getting a regulator in who's going to more evenly distribute the money across the footballing pyramid, and therefore try to close that gap even more. Am I saying anything outrageous there?
It just depends how they try and close that gap. Because again, football clubs do still have voting rights, don't they? And you can't take that away from them, because that the democracy that we have in football goes.
It's clearly not working, that democracy, though, is it, Justin? That's why a regulator will hopefully come in and make sure that there's actually a deal between the EFL and Premier League to make sure that money is more evenly distributed. And the government have even said, I think it was the Conservative government, so last guy's out, but still, I think the new government will say exactly the same thing, that if the Premier League and the EFL don't agree a deal, they'll have one imposed on them anyway.
Well, it just depends when we get to that. Because again, we've been talking about this for what feels like quite a few years now, and we're still nowhere near closer to having a regulator in. But again, I think the other conversation you've got to have is what could EFL and Premier League reform look like when combining the divisions? Is there a world where that could exist? That's something to explore and look into over the next couple of weeks, as we inevitably, try and fill the international break with more conversation on this.
Maybe. We may have something planned, mate. Don't put us down too much like that. But I think the bottom line here is, obviously, it's not looking great in terms of the Premier League, with the newly promoted sides all being relegated in 2 successive seasons, if everything pans out like we expect. But in the Championship, prior to COVID, we only had 7 teams getting instantly promoted after relegation in 10 seasons. But since COVID, we've had 6 teams in 4 seasons, potentially 8 in 5 if Burnley and Sheffield United go up this season, which shows something has drastically, changed in the past few years. I think COVID was a big player in that, because the finances in the Championship were so unbalanced anyway, and so at risk of toppling, and all it took was one slight gust of wind for that to all go down to shit. And COVID, I think, did play a big part in that. Sorry, I've ranted again for a lot here. You could tell I'm getting a bit carried away.
But as a Championship podcast, I think it's a good stance to have. It's an important stance to have, because
what is the point? Bearers. What is the point in us all being here, Justin? Look, I'm worried about Derby staying up this season in the Championship, but what's the bloody point if we're just going to be in the Championship for the rest of history? What is the point in us? What we're all in sport in general for competitiveness, aren't we? And we're losing that competitiveness because of what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, what you've got as supporters is once in a generation. When your team coming from the Championship, you've got a once in a generation thing that's got to happen for you to be a success in the Premier League. You look at Leicester, will they repeat winning the Premier League? No. Will Forest repeat finishing in the top 4 if they do finish in the top 4 this season? Big question marks over that. Are teams ever going to win domestic cup competitions? The squads aren't strong enough, big enough, etc., to compete with those teams that are in the top 6, etc. All this wealth. So, you're looking at once in a generation moments really to have success, and then you've got to try and build on that, that's the difficulty. And unfortunately, when that's all you're really gunning for. What's the point? Yeah, you do. You've got to raise the question. What is the point?
What is the point in it all?
What is the point?
Sorry, we've probably gone on for a bit long there, ladies and gents, but hopefully you found that interesting and not just two old men complaining about modern society. But here we are. This has been the Second Tier Midweek Show, where we've been talking about all the latest from across the Championship from the past few days. And we'll, of course, be back again tomorrow with the preview show brought to you by SBK. So we look forward to seeing you then for that. But this has been the Second Tier Podcast. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.